Forget heroic sagas, romantic adventures, or lofty ideals. History also knows other narratives, far grittier, more cynical, yet no less captivating. At the center of our investigation today is Antoine-François de Bonneval, a French nobleman whose life became the embodiment of betrayal and unscrupulousness. A brilliant but untamed officer, he served King Louis XIV, but his explosive temper and constant scandals led to an inevitable downfall. Instead of accepting punishment or atoning for his actions, he chose a path of absolute defiance. He fled France, renounced his Catholic faith, and offered his services to the sworn enemy of European monarchies, the Ottoman Empire. Thus, Antoine-François de Bonneval transformed into Ahmet Pasha, becoming one of Sultan Mahmud I's key advisors, a reformer of Ottoman artillery, and the founder of Turkey's first military engineering school. His name is still surrounded by an aura of mystery, adventure, and even heroism. But behind this grand legend lies not merely the story of a fugitive, but a cold-blooded act of treason that allowed a man who betrayed his homeland to build an incredible new career in a foreign land. This is not a saga of a noble exile, but an anatomy of political desertion. Antoine-François de Bonneval was born in 1686 in the ancient Limousin castle of Cusack-Bonneval. His family, whose lineage stretched back centuries, passed down not only titles, but also an unshakable sense of self-superiority, often bordering on arrogance. The blood of knights and military commanders flowed in his veins, and from an early age, Antoine-François absorbed the conviction that he was permitted more than others. At just 13, he began his military career, first in the Navy, then in the Army. Under the command of distinguished generals like the Duke of Vendôme and Prince Eugene of Savoy, Bonneval quickly distinguished himself. His tactical successes on the battlefields of the War of the Spanish Succession brought him rapid promotion and a reputation as a military genius. Yet the brilliance of his talent was always accompanied by a dark shadow, an untamed temper, disregard for subordination, and a penchant for reckless actions. He was a compulsive gambler, a duelist, a man whose life revolved around luxury, risk, and a constant defiance of societal norms. This uncontrollable nature, nurtured in an atmosphere of permissiveness and ancestral pride, inevitably led to conflicts. His career in France became a series of scandals, each only intensifying his disdain for those he considered beneath him. The culmination came in 1717. Major General Bonneval engaged in a fierce dispute with the Marquis de Chabannes, a high-ranking officer, and the conflict escalated into a duel. This act of open defiance, not his first, exhausted Louis XV's patience. A military court sentenced Bonneval to death for violating the royal ban on dueling and for numerous acts of insubordination. For a man of his standing, accustomed to impunity, this was an absolute blow to his very existence. Faced with the prospect of a dishonorable death or lifelong imprisonment, Antoine-François de Bonneval did not seek forgiveness or attempt to atone for his guilt. He could not accept defeat. He could not yield. Instead, he chose a path that only a man who recognized no authority but his own ego could consider: flight. This was not merely an escape from justice, but a renunciation of everything that constituted his former life, his homeland, his faith, his name. At that moment, Antoine-François de Bonneval definitively severed ties with his past, forever sealing his fate as a traitor. The 18th century was not an era of unshakable borders and absolute loyalty. Europe, exhausted by decades of bloody wars, including the devastating War of the Spanish Succession, was undergoing a period of fragile equilibrium. Old empires were decaying, new ambitions clashed, and the political landscape constantly shifted like quicksand. Dynastic interests often outweighed national ones, and religious differences, though still a powerful factor, increasingly gave way to cynical political expediency. rulers forged and broke alliances with astonishing ease, and yesterday's enemy could become today's ally if pragmatic considerations demanded it. In the East, the Ottoman Empire, once the formidable scourge of Europe, was experiencing a period of relative stagnation. Although its dominions still stretched across 3 continents and its army remained one of the largest in the world, the military superiority achieved in the 16th and 17th centuries had been lost. Defeats at Vienna and on other fronts showed that the Janissary Corps, once invincible, were inferior to well-trained and equipped European armies. The realization of this backwardness, especially in artillery and fortification, was ripening in Constantinople. The Sultan's court, attempting to regain its former glory, began to show interest in Western military technologies and tactics, creating a unique opportunity for those who could offer this knowledge. It was in this atmosphere of geopolitical uncertainty and pragmatism that a particular type of adventurer flourished: ambitious, unscrupulous, and willing to place personal ambition above any ideological barriers. For a man like Bonneval, exiled from his homeland and condemned to death, the world did not close all doors. On the contrary, it opened a new, unexpected perspective. The idea of serving the infidels, the sworn enemies of Christianity, would have remained an unthinkable heresy for many Europeans of that time. However, for certain individuals whose morals were as flexible as their military training, such an opportunity did not seem utterly absurd. European courts, especially the French, had long maintained complex and sometimes contradictory relations with the Porte. France, seeking to weaken its long-standing rivals, the Habsburgs, often supported the Ottoman Empire as a counterweight, establishing diplomatic and even trade ties. This created a precedent for interaction beyond simple enmity. European embassies were located in Constantinople, negotiations were held, and ideas were exchanged. In this bubbling cauldron of political intrigues and military reforms, a man with talent and a lack of moral constraints like Bonneval could find his place. It was a world where, for money or power, one could buy not only loyalty, but also knowledge itself, even if it came from yesterday's enemy. Thus, Antoine-François de Bonneval's flight from France was not merely a desperate leap into the unknown. It became possible due to a confluence of circumstances that formed a unique historical conjuncture: the weakening of traditional ties, one empire's need for modernization, and another's willingness to overlook the origin of talent for its own benefit. His story is not only a drama of personal choice, but also a reflection of broader trends of the era, when political calculation became more powerful than religious dogma, and a career could be built on the ruins of old loyalties. Antoine-François de Bonneval's flight from France was merely the first act of his grand transformation. Having shed the stigma of a man condemned to death, he did not hide in the shadows. On the contrary, his path led directly into the heart of enemy lands. His first stop was Vienna, the capital of the Habsburg Empire, France's long-standing rival. Here, in 1718, Bonneval made an attempt that seems incredibly audacious today. He offered his military talents to Emperor Charles VI. This was not a gesture of desperation, but a cold-blooded calculation. Bonneval perfectly understood that his knowledge of the French army, its tactics and fortifications, would be invaluable to any adversary of Louis XIV. He expected not just refuge, but an immediate restoration of status, albeit under a foreign flag. However, Vienna was not quick to embrace him. His past, filled with scandals, duels, and acts of insubordination, haunted him. Moreover, his arrogance and demanding nature alienated even those who might have appreciated his military genius. Prince Eugene of Savoy, under whom Bonneval had once fought and whose opinion carried decisive weight, refused to accept him into service. Perhaps the prince did not trust a man who so easily changed allegiances, or simply did not wish to associate with such an uncontrollable character. Europe, it seemed, was slamming its doors shut on the former French general. This rejection became a turning point. For Bonneval, whose ego did not permit defeat, it was an insult that pushed him to an even more radical step. If Christian monarchs did not want him, he would find someone who would appreciate his boundless ambition and unscrupulousness. And so, in 1720, Antoine-François de Bonneval committed his most daring and scandalous act of betrayal, which forever changed his destiny and his name. He traveled to Constantinople, the heart of the Ottoman Empire, the citadel of the infidels, the sworn enemies of the Christian world. There, beneath the arches of the mosques, the former French nobleman renounced the Catholic faith, embraced Islam, and took a new name, Ahmet. This was not merely a formal conversion, but a defiant break with everything that constituted his former identity. He did not simply change allegiance, he changed civilization, religion, culture, transforming from Count de Bonneval into Ahmet Pasha. This step was the height of cynicism, dictated solely by pragmatic calculation. Here in Constantinople, he saw his last chance for a new, even more brilliant career. The Ottoman court, desperately in need of Western military knowledge, welcomed the defector with open arms. Sultan Mahmud I and his viziers perfectly understood what a valuable asset had come to them, an experienced European officer who knew all the secrets of advanced armies. Bonneval, now Ahmet Pasha, immediately set to work. He began convincing the Ottoman leadership of the necessity of radical military reform, especially in the field of artillery. His bold proposals, based on European experience, promised to restore the Ottoman Empire's former military superiority. Thus, a man betrayed by his homeland and condemned to death not only escaped punishment, but instantly found a new life, becoming a key figure in the modernization of his former enemy's army. As Ahmet Pasha, the former French count wasted no time adapting. He didn't just adopt a new faith and name, he completely restructured his personality, demonstrating a phenomenal capacity for mimicry and strategic thinking. His first step was an immediate immersion into the intrigues of the Ottoman court, where he astonishingly quickly identified the empire's key vulnerabilities. Bonneval, now Ahmet Pasha, possessed a rare gift. He could not only perceive a problem, but also convincingly propose its solution, presenting himself as the only person capable of achieving it. His charisma, honed by years of court intrigues and military campaigns, became a powerful weapon. He did not grovel, but spoke to Sultan Mahmud I and his viziers from a position of strength, as an expert who knew what they did not. The European military science he brought with him was for the Ottomans terra incognita, an uncharted land full of promise. Ahmet Pasha masterfully played on their desire to regain lost glory, on their fear of advancing Europe. He painted vivid pictures of a renewed, invincible Ottoman army capable of dictating its will once more. This was a game played on the deepest ambitions and fears of the ruling elite, and he perfectly understood how to use this powerful lever of influence. He didn't just propose reforms, he sold a vision of the future. Bonneval understood that to achieve his goals, he needed not just supporters, but accomplices who shared his risk and his reward. He carefully selected his experts and assistants from among those who were ready for change, who felt marginalized in the old system, or who saw in him a chance for personal advancement. He skillfully exploited their discontent, their thirst for power and influence, creating around himself a circle of like-minded individuals who themselves became conduits for his ideas. This was not mere persuasion, but subtle psychological manipulation, where everyone felt they were making a choice in their own favor, while Bonneval skillfully guided them toward his goals. Creating excitement around his proposals was another of his strengths. He didn't just submit reports, he staged demonstrations, described future victories, and painted vivid images of triumph. His speeches were full of confidence, his plans, boldness. He knew how to create a sense of urgency and uniqueness, convincing them that only now, and only with his help, could the Ottoman Empire achieve a breakthrough. He was a master of self-promotion, transforming his knowledge into an exclusive and highly sought-after commodity that could only be obtained through him. His very biography, despite its scandalous nature, now worked for him. A man condemned to death in one of the most powerful European courts, then accepted and elevated in Constantinople, became living proof of his own exceptionalism and indomitable will. He was not just a European, he was a European who chose the East, thereby proving that true power and prospects were now here. This created an aura of mystery and invincibility, strengthening his position and forcing even the most entrenched skeptics to listen to his words. Thus, Antoine-François de Bonneval's transformation into Ahmet Pasha was not merely a change of name, but a complete reprogramming of personality to achieve maximum effectiveness in a new environment. His success in Constantinople was a direct consequence of his perfectly honed personal toolkit, impeccable adaptation, the ability to read others' ambitions, use them for his own ends, and create an atmosphere of exclusivity and urgency around himself. He didn't just bring knowledge, he brought the psychology of a winner capable of building a new career on the ruins of the old, using only his intellect and absolute unscrupulousness. Having received an unprecedented carte blanche, Ahmet Pasha immediately set about implementing his most ambitious plans. His main patron was Sultan Mahmud I himself, who, being a perceptive and far-sighted man, perfectly understood the critical backwardness of his army. The Sultan saw in Bonneval not merely a defector, but a key to the revival of Ottoman military might. He provided Ahmet Pasha not only the necessary resources, but also political protection, which was vitally important in an environment permeated by intrigue and conservatism. The Sultan's support allowed Ahmet Pasha to begin profound transformations that affected the most sensitive areas of the Ottoman military apparatus. The beneficiaries of his reforms were not only the Sultan's court, dreaming of a return to former glory, but also those young, ambitious officers and officials who saw modernization as the empire's only path. Ahmet Pasha skillfully formed a circle of like-minded individuals around himself, attracting those who were ready to break old dogmas for career advancement and personal gain. He shared knowledge, trained, and provided opportunities for them to prove themselves, thereby creating a new elite, loyal not only to the Sultan, but also to him personally. These individuals, understanding that their future depended on the success of Bonneval's reforms, became his loyal supporters, helping to overcome bureaucratic barriers and sabotage. However, Ahmet Pasha faced a formidable antagonist, the powerful Janissary Corps. These elite troops, once formidable and invincible, had by the 18th century become a self-satisfied, corrupt force whose privileges and influence had become far more important than their combat effectiveness. The Janissaries were the living embodiment of the old order, vehemently resisting any innovations that threatened their monopoly and way of life. They saw Ahmet Pasha not as a reformer, but as an outsider who had come to destroy their age-old foundations. Their resistance was not merely passive sabotage, it was active opposition, undermining the Sultan's authority and threatening the very existence of the reforms. The conflict between Ahmet Pasha and the Janissaries became the central drama of his Ottoman career. On one side was the French general, bringing advanced European knowledge and methods. On the other, a fossilized military caste whose power rested on tradition and fear. Bonneval, as Ahmet Pasha, perfectly understood that without breaking Janissary resistance, his reforms were doomed. He began by focusing on creating new units trained in the European style and reorganizing the artillery, an area where the Janissaries had less influence. He methodically built a new army alongside the old, eroding the Janissaries' authority and demonstrating their inefficiency. This was a chess game where each of Bonneval's moves was aimed at weakening the opponent and strengthening his own position, step by step, bringing closer the inevitable clash of two worlds, the old and the new, in the heart of the Ottoman Empire. The inevitable clash occurred not on the battlefield, but in the stuffy corridors of the Sultan's palace. Although Ahmet Pasha methodically undermined the power of the Janissaries, their roots ran too deep within the empire's fabric. Their resistance, initially passive, then overt, was not an isolated rebellion, but a constant subversion, poisoning the atmosphere. They seized every opportunity to discredit the French renegade, accusing him of heresy, extravagance, and even espionage. For them, Bonneval was not just a foreigner, but a threat to their age-old right to idleness and dominance. The culmination came when the political pendulum swung. Despite Sultan Mahmud I's support, Ahmet Pasha became a hostage to palace intrigues. A new, more conservative Grand Vizier, Aziz Mehmed Pasha, came to power, and his primary goal was to weaken the influence of the reformers. He saw Bonneval not only as a source of change, but also as a potential rival whose European directness and independent character were alien to Ottoman court diplomacy. This proved to be Ahmet Pasha's final mistake. He underestimated the depth and cunning of these intrigues, accustomed as he was to more open conflict. The palace web closed in. Accusations, which had previously been fended off thanks to the Sultan's protection, now gained weight. Ahmet Pasha was accused of abusing power, embezzling the treasury, and, most dangerously, inciting rebellion against the Janissaries, an accusation that, despite its veracity, placed him in an extremely perilous position. This was not a direct exposure of his betrayal of France, it was an exposure of him as an outsider, too powerful and too dangerous for those who resisted change. His European mind, so valued by the Sultan, now became his vulnerability. In 1738, after several years of successful reforms and the establishment of new artillery, Ahmet Pasha was removed from all posts and exiled to the island of Rhodes. This was not a death sentence, but a humiliating banishment intended to break his spirit. The man who had fled a death sentence in France to build a new empire of influence in the East found himself a prisoner on a small island, his ambitions temporarily shattered against the rocks of Ottoman bureaucracy and envy. This was not the end of his career, but a dramatic confirmation that even the most talented adventurer cannot fully control his fate in the whirlpool of foreign political struggle. The island of Rhodes, once a stronghold of the Knights Hospitaller, became for Ahmet Pasha not a place of oblivion, but merely a temporary respite in his indomitable struggle for influence. Barely a year passed before the political winds in Constantinople shifted again. Sultan Mahmud I, despite the vizier's intrigues, had not forgotten the value of European knowledge and the talent of his disgraced reformer. He needed not just theorists, but practitioners capable of revitalizing the Ottoman army, and Bonneval, for all his flaws, remained one of the few who could do so. In 1739, Ahmet Pasha was recalled from exile. His return, however, did not signify a full restoration of his former power. Palace intrigues had left their mark. Ahmet Pasha received the title of Governor of Chios, but his primary task remained the continuation of military reforms, though without the previous boundless carte blanche. He focused on modernizing artillery units and training officers, attempting to implement European standards amidst constant resistance from conservative forces. His School of Artillery Engineers, which he had founded earlier, continued to function, becoming one of the few tangible institutional achievements of his Ottoman career. This was not a triumphant comeback, but rather an acknowledgment of his indispensability in a narrow but critically important field. Ahmet Pasha's political influence significantly diminished after his exile. He was no longer the all-powerful reformer capable of directly dictating terms. His activities were reduced to the role of a respected but controlled expert. He participated in diplomatic missions, for example, in negotiations with Sweden, attempting to use his European experience to strengthen the Ottoman Empire's position on the international stage. However, his proposals for broader military transformations affecting the entire army structure met with increasing resistance from the ulama and the janissaries, whose power had only been temporarily shaken but not definitively broken. For them, Bonneval remained an outsider, whose reforms only undermined the traditional order. Thus, despite his personal resilience and return from exile, his most ambitious plans for the total modernization of the Ottoman army were never fully realized. The life of Antoine-François de Bonneval, or Ahmet Pasha, ended in 1747 in Constantinople. He died a natural death, escaping both the French guillotine and the Ottoman intrigues that could have led to a more brutal end. His career in the Ottoman Empire, which began with a monumental betrayal, concluded not in complete triumph, but also not in total defeat. He left behind not only a school and modernized artillery, but also a precedent, proof that talent and unscrupulousness, seasoned with cold calculation, could open doors even to the most closed and hostile worlds. His story became a vivid example of how personal ambition could outweigh any ideological and religious barriers, creating figures whose moral character was deeply questionable, but whose influence on the course of history cannot be denied. But even after his death, Antoine-François de Bonneval, or Ahmet Pasha, found no peace. His biography, woven from audacity and betrayal, paradoxically underwent an astonishing transformation. Years later, the details of his exile, his escape from a death sentence, and his cynical conversion to another faith became not a shameful mark, but elements of a captivating legend. History, as is often the case, proved prone to romanticization, preferring the vivid image of an adventurous renegade to the uncomfortable truth of an unprincipled deserter. In collective memory, the image of Bonneval Pasha was gradually cleansed of the stain of betrayal. He came to be perceived not as a man who betrayed his homeland to save his own skin, but as a genius whose talents were not adequately appreciated, and who found his true calling far from the hypocritical European court. The exoticism of the East, the change of faith, the large-scale reforms in a foreign land, all these intertwined into an aura of mystery and heroism. He transformed into a symbol of indomitable will, a man who, despite all obstacles, managed to build a new life and achieve greatness, albeit under a foreign flag. This version of his life, more appealing and less repulsive, displaced from the public consciousness the true motives of his actions: cold calculation, absolute egoism, and a willingness to sacrifice any principles for personal gain. The paradox of his legacy lies in the fact that his real achievements, the modernization of Ottoman artillery, the creation of the engineering school, were undeniable. He indeed brought advanced European knowledge to an empire that desperately needed it. But these achievements were a direct consequence of his betrayal, his willingness to sell his knowledge, and loyalty to anyone who could offer him power and security. He became an indispensable instrument in the hands of the Sultan, a man whose influence was immense, but whose moral cost was exorbitantly high. His career became a striking testament to the fact that genius can serve any purpose, and that effectiveness often has nothing to do with ethics. The universal lesson from the history of Antoine-François de Bonneval is that sometimes the most significant changes in the world are wrought not by heroes with pure intentions, but by cold pragmatists for whom personal gain trumps all else. His fate is not an inspiring saga of a noble exile, but rather an anatomy of political desertion, demonstrating how far a person can go after rejecting all moral constraints. It reminds us that history is not always just, and that myths surrounding heroes are often built upon a foundation of forgotten or deliberately distorted facts. Ultimately, Bonneval Ahmet Pasha emerged not so much as a great reformer, but rather as a living embodiment of boundless human ambition, capable of transcending any barriers, national, religious, or moral, in pursuit of his own goals.